Hello friends, today we are going to start a female reproductive system. So the most important thing about this chapter are the questions that are asked already from previous examination. So mostly in this from this chapter a short question is asked. These are the list of a short question that is already asked. Female sexual cycle, phase of the menstrual cycle, discuss the phenomena of ovulation, write the method to be determine ovulation time, indicator of the ovulation and its significance, and premenstrual syndrome or PSM. Other list are the hormonal changes during the menstrual cycle, FSH, corpus luteum, ovulation, describe the various phases of the menstrual cycle and its hormone control, mention in brief regarding the safe period. So these are the important questions that are already asked in the previous papers. So let's get started the discussion. First thing first is the anatomy of the female reproductive tract. So as far as the female reproductive system is concerned, it has an ovary, same as the testis. The ovary has a two function, gametogenesis, and another one is the endocrine function, that is eventually secreting the hormones, right, sex hormones. So basically I am going to compare whenever I find the opportunity ovaries and testis. So same as the testis, ovary also has a two function. One is to generate a germ cell, another one is the form hormones, right? So second portion is the fallopian tube or the uterine tube, then it comes to the uterus, then the cervix, and finally in the vagina, right? So let's discuss the bigger portion, the uterus first. So this portion is the uterus. So same as an abdominal organ, uterus is a pelvic organ. It also has a three layer, from outer to inward. From most outer one there is a serosa, it is known as a serosal layer. Now inside the serosal layer there is a muscular layer, and inside the muscular layer obviously epithelial layer. Now the serosal layer is most of the time is known as a perimetrium. Muscle layer or muscular layer is known as a myometrium. The contraction of the uterus is because of this myometrium. And the last one, the epithelial layer, is known as endometrium. So here's the thing, that the muscle fibers that present inside the uterus, it runs in the various direction, and the distinct layer are very difficult to define, as we define in a small and large intestine, that inner circular, outer longitudinal, that kind of definite thing is not present whenever we talk about the uterus. Inside the uterus, when we talk about the myometrium, muscle fiber will run in every direction, right? So we cannot identify any distinct layer. And one more thing about the myometrium, that muscle cells that is present in the uterus are capable of undergoing great elongation. It can increase its length. Most of the time we are going to discuss in pregnancy, the myometrium become very long and the muscle cell become very long, and is basically associated with the great enlargement of the entire uterus during the pregnancy. Now the most important thing that we are going to discuss is the endometrium of a uterus. So let's take a brief idea about what is endometrium. So this one is the endometrium. You see the myometrium is written over here, myometrium. Now above the myometrium, this entire portion is endometrium. Got it? So epithelial lining is mostly the columnar cell. It has a two things, epithelial lining and a stroma. Got it? So stroma is present in between epithelial lining and the myometrium. Got it? So inside that stroma, this portion is the epithelial lining, this portion is the myometrium, and in between that epithelial lining and myometrium, this entire portion is known as stroma. As you guys able to see, that is stroma has a various blood vessel, and it also has a glands. These are the glands. It secretes product inside the lumen of the uterus. So these are the glands, these are the blood vessels. So inside the stroma there is a blood vessel and glands. Now as far as the functional division is concerned, it is basically divided into the two. One is the basal layer, that is present inside very near to the meiometrium. Another one is the functional layer that is present above the basal layer. So mostly during the shade of a endometrium, during the menstruation, the functional layer is basically lost. The basal layer remains intact. Alright, we are going to discuss in very detail once we approach that topic. So basically the functional layer and basal layer is a part of endometrium. The layer that is below this black line is the basal layer. Layer that above the black line is the functional layer, and it is the functional layer that gets shed during the menstruation. Basal layer or basalis layer is remain intact. This is all about broad aspect of the uterus. Now let's discuss about the cervix. So this is the uterus. Now this one is the uterus, this one is the vagina, right? There are two os, one is the external os, another one is the internal os, right? The area between these two structure, internal os and external os, that particular portion is known as cervix. So by definition, cervix is the area that is present between internal os and external os. And during the pervaginal examination during the time of the labor, we have to check the opening of a cervix. This is the two finger method. The two finger are inserted in the vagina, and they are by the tip of the finger they are checking the dilatation of a cervix. Alright. So also cervix has the same layer as this uterus do. It has a perimetrium made up of serosal layer. It is a meiometrium made up of musculature, but it has a less muscle. And the last one is the endometrial layer that is known as a endocervix. And endocervix is not shed at a time of a menstruation, while on the case of the uterus, functional layer of a endometrium gets shed off. So it is a cylindrical lower part that is protrude uppermost of the vagina. It is basically 2.5 centimeter long. Got it? It has a 2.5 centimeter in length. This is all about the cervix. Now let's discuss this portion, the fallopian tube. Now as far as the fallopian tube is concerned, it also has a same three layer that the uterus has. And the main function of a tube, like any other tube, it is just a convey barrier, right? It basically convey the ovum that is secreted by the ovaries. These are the ovaries. They are secrete the ovum, and this ovum will be convey or transported inside the fallopian tube and reach somewhat over here. We discuss in detail during the pregnancy and fertilization, but right now just remember that this fallopian tube is supposed to transport the ovum. So it transport the ovum from ovaries to the uterus, and it also secrete the certain secretion that provide a nutrition during the transportation to the ovum. And basically fertilization take place in the ampulla. Now you might be thinking, what is ampulla? To understand the ampulla, let's discuss the part of a fallopian tube. Now as far as the part of a fallopian tube is concerned, the part that is situated most laterally over here, you see it is the little bit of fimbria over here. It is known as fimbriated portion. Let me enlarge that portion for you. It is look like this. Alright, so the infundibulum has a fimbria. This is the fimbria, this one is the infundibulum portion. Now just medial to the infundibulum, this portion is known as the ampulla. It is a dilated and thin walled. It is basically dilated and thin walled. Got it? And next to it, that is isthmus. Isthmus is a very narrow and thin thick wall. This one is the isthmus portion. This one is the isthmus. This one is the infundibulum that is having fimbria. This one is the ampulla. This portion is known as the isthmus that has a thick and narrow wall. And the last portion that is situated actually inside the uterus or inside the uterus, it is known as interstitial part. It is entered into the uterus. This is all about the fallopian tube. Now let's discuss small portion of the vagina. Now basically vagina is at 8 to 10 centimeter long, and the upper end surrounds the lower part of a cervix. And vagina is basically made up of musculo-membranous layer, or it is a musculo-membranous tube. So it is a muscle and it is a membrane, and it extends from cervix to the vestibule, and the mucous membrane that is present inside the vagina is basically stratified squamous epithelium. And the muscle coat, it is a outer longitudinal and inner circular layer. So it is a well defined layer, rather it is not present inside the uterus, but it is well defined in vagina, outer longitudinal, inner circular, same as small and large intestine. And the outer fiber, the most outside, is the fibrous coat, it is known as adventitia. Alright, this is all about the vagina. Now let's discuss about the external genitalia of a female external genitalia. So first let's enumerate the genitalia: mons pubis, labia minora, labia majora, clitoris, and vestibule of a vagina. So as far as the clitoris is concerned, it is basically the erectile organ. So in male the erectile organ is penis, in female the erectile organ is clitoris. There is a elongation. This is analogous with the male penis. Now the vestibule. Now vestibule is basically the space that is present between the labia majora, the labia minora. So the most outer portion is known as labia majora. Inner side, it is labia minora. In the top of this labia minora there is a clitoris, that is the erectile organ, and the space between two labia minora, this space is known as vestibule. And this vestibule is contained the opening of urethra as well as vagina. So this one is the urethral opening, this portion is the vaginal opening. Got it? Now let's discuss about the hymen. Now what is hymen? Hymen is actually a vaginal orifice that is surrounded by thin fold of mucous membrane. This is hymen. What is hymen? Hymen is the vaginal orifice. It is surrounded by a thin fold mucous membrane. Let me show you a picture of a hymen. It will be look like this. This one is the mucous membrane. This portion is the clitoris. This one is the urethral opening. This is small portion of the vaginal opening. Got it? So hymen is basically not ruptured in virgin, and this hymen is supposed to rupture during the sexual intercourse, or most of the time in female, if the female is athletic, it may be ruptured during the cycling or any harsh activity. Now the main hero of our discussion, that is ovary. Histology of a ovary. Now as far as the development is concerned, during the developmental phases, if the ovary develops, it develops from a cortex, and if the medulla develops, it is developed from the if the testis develops, it develops from the medulla. Got it? Now ovary has a two portion, cortex and the medulla. You can see this is the cortex portion, having a follicle that is developed in the different stages, starting from over here: primordial, primary, secondary, pre-antral, antral, Graphian, mature. Then this one is the corpus luteum, corpus albicans, that we are eventually discuss in our next subsequent slide. So this one is the cortex of a ovary, this one is the medulla of a ovary. So you can see the most important or more active portion is the cortex. So outer cortex or a cortex has a ovarian follicle. Now what is ovarian follicle? We are going to discuss that. Now the medulla or the inner medulla, as you guys see, it has a neurovascular element. It has a nerve supply as well as blood supply. And the most outer side, the outermost portion, has a surface epithelium. Now let's take a clear concept about ovarian follicle. Now ovarian follicle is not a germ cell. Got it? Ovarian follicle is not a germ cell. Rather, ovarian follicle is made up of two things. One is germ cell, another one is a supporting cell. So ovarian follicle is basically the functional unit of a ovary. There are more and more number of ovarian follicle, and the germ cell that is present inside that ovarian follicle, in female it is known as oocyte. In male, that is present inside the testis is known as a sperm or spermatogonia, right? In female it is known as oocyte. Now in male there is also a supporting cell. That supporting cell is known as a Sertoli cell. Now in female the supporting cell is also present. It is known as a follicular cells. So in male, supporting cell is basically nourish the germ cell. Same thing happens over here. Follicular cell will nourish the oocyte and it secrete the hormones. Got it? So ovarian follicle is not a germ cell. Rather, ovarian follicle is a collection of a germ cell along with the supporting cell, and supporting cell is known as a follicular cell and the germ cell is known as a oocyte. That oocyte is like a spermatogonia. Got it? Now ovarian surface epithelial cell will rapidly divide to repair the wall after the rupture during the corpus luteal formation or after the ovulation. Right? So, and the follicular cell that we discuss over here, it is like a Sertoli cell. Now let's discuss in detail about the ovarian follicle. Now you know what is ovarian follicle. What is the difference between ovarian follicle and what is the oocyte, right? Oocyte is not ovarian follicle or ovarian follicle is not oocyte. Rather, ovarian follicle is the collection of oocyte plus follicular cell. So now let's discuss the various stages of a development of a ovarian follicle. So this one is the ovary, showing starting the developmental from the over here, and it will develop, become larger, then there is a ovulation, release of the ovum, then become a corpus luteum. Now starting with the primordial follicle. So primordial follicle is the smallest follicle. This primordial follicle will eventually converted into primary and secondary follicle or the pre-antral follicle. Then antral follicle will be formed. Then the Graphian follicle will be formed, or in some book it is written as a dominant follicle or mature follicle. Then corpus luteum form, and after that corpus albicans form. Now let me give you some clarity in the between the pre-antral and antral follicle. See, the antral or antrum, the meaning of antrum is a space. If there is a space appear over here, if there is a small vacuoles is present over here, then it is known as antral follicle. And all the stages that is present before the antral, it is known as pre-antral follicle. Got it? Then last one is the corpus luteum. Now whenever we start discussing the ovarian follicle, you have to understand three things about the ovarian follicle. If you are going to mention the ovarian follicle in exam, you have to mention three things in every ovarian follicle or every stages of the ovarian follicle. First thing is the growth of a follicle. Second thing is the state of gametes, the state of germ cell. And the last thing is the endocrine function, which are the hormones are produced by each follicle, right? So we are going to understand this all the follicle: primordial, pre-antral, antral, dominant and corpus luteum, and we are discussing all the three things simultaneously: growth of that particular follicle, state of the gametes or the state of the germ cell in that particular follicle, and the endocrine function of that follicle. Again, this endocrine function is basically from the supporting cell, that is follicular cell. Got it? So let's get started. Ovarian reserve. Now see, the number of ovarian follicle that is present once the female is in a fetal form. During the fetal life of that female, there are 7 million primordial follicle are there. Got it? Whenever the female is in fetal form, 7 million primordial follicle are present inside ovary. when that female born at the time of the birth, it will be decreased up to 2 million. Out of the 2 million, 50% are atretic, they become nullified or get necrosis or apoptosis. 50% will be removed and only 1 million is remain at a time of a after that, right? Now at the time of the puberty, from the 1 million, that is 10 lakh, at the time of the puberty only 3 lakh will be remain. Got it? And inside during the reproductive life, after at the puberty, once the menarche start menstruation, the female start menstruating regularly, there is a regular ovulation will be there. During the reproductive life, only one ovum will be released per month or per cycle. So in that case, this entire life of that female, it will secrete only 500 follicle. Got it? So out of 3 lakh, only 500 follicle will be released and remaining will be degenerate. This all the figure that I taken is from the Ganon, so it is trustworthy, right? So let me revise one more time. During the fetal development, 7 million primordial follicle are there. At the time of the birth, from the 7 million it converted into 2 million, and after in this 2 million, 50% is atretic, so 1 million is remaining. At the time of the puberty, out of that 1 million or 10 lakh, only 3 lakh is remaining. And during the reproductive life, the female will secrete 1 ovum per cycle. So this entire reproductive life, it only secrete 500 follicle. Remaining will be degenerate. So let's discuss the different follicular stages or different growth or the growth of a follicular stages. So let's starting with our first one is the primordial follicle. This figure I taken from a Hindu Korana book. So the primordial follicle, we are going to discuss three things. One is the growth of a primordial follicle, second one is the state of a gametes or the state of a germ cell, and third one is the endocrine function of a follicular cell. So you guys see that this single this single circular structure that is present is a germ cell, and the in testis in male, the main germ cell from which the sperm will develop, it is known as a spermatogonia. In female, that spermatogonia, instead we are going to take we are going to say about oogonia. Oocyte will develop from oogonia. Same thing, that is spermatocyte develop from spermatogonia, right? Now this oocyte or oogonia will be surrounded by, you can see that simple epithelial cell, right? So this entire structure is known as primordial follicle. This primordial follicle is made up of one oogonia. It is surrounded by a simple single layer of a epithelial cell, right? So oogonia surrounded by a simple epithelial cell, and it make a primordial follicle. And this epithelial cell, it is known as a granulosa cell. So what is granulosa cell? Granulosa cell is the covering of oocyte that is made up of epithelial lining, right? What is the function of granulosa cell or the epithelial cell that surround oogonia? Same as what Sertoli cell do, it provide nutrition to the oocyte, right? Which nutrition is required? Basically the amino acid, nucleic acid and pyruvate. Now here's the thing, growth of a primordial follicle is independent of a FSH or gonadotropin. Just right now remember it, the growth of a primordial follicle will be independent of a FSH. We discuss that particular portion later on. This is all about the growth. Now let's talk about the state of a gametes. What are the oogonia in which state? So oogonia first enter into the first meiosis or first meiotic division. Once the oogonia enter inside the first meiotic division, now it is known as primary oocyte. While in case of the spermatogenesis, once the spermatogonia enter inside the mitosis, it converted into the primary spermatocyte, and that primary spermatocyte then it goes into the meiotic division, it convert into secondary spermatocyte. Now in case of the oogenesis, oogonia once enter inside the first meiotic division, it known as primary oocyte. And during this meiosis, the development will be arrested at the prophase of a meiosis 1. Got it? During the development, during the state of a gametes, once the oogonia start dividing by first meiosis, it will be arrested in the prophase of a meiosis 1. Why it is arrested, that we discuss in our next slide. This is all about the gametes. What about the endocrine function? So it is a granulosa cell that is supposed to produce any hormones, right? Now in that case, primordial follicle has a only single lining of a granulosa cell. They do not produce any ovarian hormone. Now here's the thing, why arrest in prophase of a meiosis 1? The answer is that there are two reasons. First reason is that there are some protein that is required for completion of the meiosis. Got it? There are certain proteins that is required for completion of the meiosis, so the level of that particular protein that is required are very low. So which are the protein that is required for completion of meiosis and their level is low? First protein is CDK1. Now what is this CDK1? CDK stands for cyclic dependent kinase. Got it? And the second one is cyclin B. These two proteins are very low, so meiosis is not completed. Second thing is a very high level of cyclic AMP. Yes, it is cyclic AMP. Very high level of cyclic AMP will ultimately decrease or arrest the prophase at meiosis 1. This is all about the primordial follicle. Now let's discuss the pre-antral follicle. So this portion is the primordial follicle. See, the epithelial lining is the simple lining or simple epithelial. Now in order to make a pre-antral follicle or primary and secondary follicle, this epithelial lining is changed into the cuboidal. Got it? So simple epithelium converted into the cuboidal granulosa cell or cuboidal epithelium, then primordial follicle is now known as primary follicle. So what is the difference between primordial follicle and primary follicle? In primordial follicle, the epithelial lining is the simple epithelial lining. Once that simple epithelial lining is converted into the cuboidal lining, it is known as primary follicle. Now that cuboidal lining, when it become proliferated and become multi-layered, that multi-layered follicle is known as secondary follicle. Got it? And what is pre-antral follicle? So pre-antral follicle is that, I told you in that before, that there is a development of somehow there is a space develop inside this follicle. So all the stages before that appearance of space, it is known as pre-antral follicle. Once the fluid filled cavity, that space that is filled with fluid, once the fluid filled cavities appear, then it is known as antral follicle, that we discuss in our next topic. So somehow this primary follicle, now it is made up surrounded by the cuboidal granulosa cell, it become multi-layered, that is known as secondary follicle. Once it become 3 to 6 layer, then granulosa cell itself secrete a paracrine factor. Right? What is paracrine factor? The factor which act nearby. So you can see that in very near to the secondary follicle, very near to this cuboidal epithelial, there is a stromal cell. Once the paracrine factor is released, it convert the nearby stroma cell into the theca cell and it make a theca cell over here. What is theca cell? Theca cell is nothing but a stromal layer that surround the follicular wall. Now once the granulosa cell is become 3 to 6 layer, then that granulosa cell is now capable of secreting the paracrine factor. That paracrine factor will eventually convert the surrounding stromal cell into the theca cell. Got it? Now this theca cell is eventually surround the entire granulosa cell. So once the theca cell is formed, the follicle is known as a mature pre-antral follicle. Got it? Now let's discuss about the state of gametes. What are the state of a germ cell? Still it is primary oocyte that is arrested in the prophase 1 or meiosis 1. The difference is that now it starts secreting the glycoprotein, that is ZP1, ZP2 and ZP3. That glycoprotein will eventually make a zona pellucida. Yes, so zona pellucida is not present in the primordial follicle, but it is now present in pre-antral follicle because it starts secreting the glycoprotein, that is ZP1, ZP2 and ZP3. So this now the oocyte will be surrounded by a thick layer known as a zona pellucida. That zona pellucida, if you guys know, it is basically provide a surface for sperm binding during the fertilization. Again, we are going to discuss in very details once we discuss the fertilization. This is all about the gametes. So only difference that is taking place in the pre-antral follicle is that formation of a zona pellucida. Now the endocrine function. Now as the granulosa cell divide and become multi-layered, now they express FSH receptor. Got it? So they are just start expressing the receptor. They do not produce any hormone. Then theca cell will express the LH receptor, and they also do not produce any hormone. So if you compare the female with the male, inside a male, FSH receptor is present over the Sertoli cell and LH receptor is present over the Leydig cell. While in this case, granulosa cell will express FSH receptor and theca cell will express LH receptor. So in nutshell, theca cell is analog to the Leydig cell over testis. Got it? This is all for our today's lecture. In next lecture, we are going to continue our discussion of our development of the follicle. We are discussing about antral follicle.